Good day, everybody. It is Calxiyn here, and if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe for more RWBY videos, and this video is brought to you by my patrons and my YouTube membership members, so thanks to them for their support. Today we will be breaking down the indecisive king, also known as the king, the crown, and the widow, and so this fairy tale is super interesting because, okay, it's not confirmed, it's not 100% confirmed, but it is highly possible, it is highly likely that the crown shown in this story is actually the relic of choice. Now, I know there's been some arguments because, for example, I know, like, the RWBY wiki added, like, the powers of the crown being the powers of the crown in the story, and people are like, that's not confirmed, like, this could just be a fairy tale, like, those could not be the actual powers, like, there's a lot of back and forth just because people are arguing, like, yeah, it's not confirmed, and it's not confirmed, but do I personally think that this is the relic? Yes, okay, I think that this is the relic, don't come for me, but yeah, maybe the wiki shouldn't be updated until we know for sure, because that would be super funny, but I'm like, would RWBY really trick us like that? Like, would they trick us by showing us a crown that has a very choice-based power and then being like, LOL, no, those aren't the powers? Like, would they really trick us like that? Like, I just don't think so. And I'm also inclined to believe that the king in this story is at least one of Ozpin's lives. I'm not sure about the King of Vale yet. I do want to talk about that as we sort of break down the story, but I do think that this could be one of Ozpin's lives. I do think it could be the King of Vale. Could it be some random-ass king? I guess. But, like, I think that this is Ozpin. There's no confirmation this is Ozpin. I will be just referring to the character as the king, but we will talk about the Ozpin-y elements as they come up later. So here we start with Once Upon a Time, which is very similar to the fairy tale convention from The Girl in a Tower, that one being a long, long time ago in a land far away, and I discussed that in that video, but this line is a very popular fairy tale convention for the illusion that, like, something did happen, just not here. You know, like, oh, once upon a time, like, it happened once upon a time, like, maybe not this time, but it happened, you know, somewhere, sometime, right? And so there's an ironic usage of it, like, for Salem's story, like, a long, long time ago, like, it was literally, like, a whole other world ago, pre-snap, that Salem's story happened. And similarly, I just feel like Once Upon a Time is sort of a hint that this actually did happen, because as a fairy tale convention, it's supposed to give the illusion of it actually happening, right? And I feel like that Ozpin could do that, so people, again, similar to the story of Seasons, don't think that magic actually exists and all that stuff, don't think that relics actually exist. So in order to make sure that they don't think that these magical objects exist, it's like, oh, well, you know, it's just a fairy tale once upon a time. That's sort of what I think about that. I think it could be, like, ironic somehow, but I haven't quite figured out how yet. Now, the king holds court, in which people come to him for advice, you know, and in exchange, the king gives you advice, but you are, like, required to do whatever he directed. I don't know if that's, like, a law, or just, like, you know, a promise or whatever. Holding court. Holding court is something very popular, but it's more so in, like, recent fantasy stuff, compared to, like, old fairy tales, you know what I mean? Like, there's an episode of Tangled, the series, where Rapunzel, I think it's called Queen for a Day, and she does the exact same thing. Like, she has to handle the complaints of the citizens, or, like, make judgments. You know, there's, like, two men that want to use the same pasture for their sheep. Like, it's just stuff like that. This does happen a lot in, like, other Disney things. Like, I think Jasmine wants to hold court in one of them. You know, and, like, you listen to the people and stuff. I think that Sleeping Beauty also holds court in one of the, like, direct-to-DVD, like, special episode thingies. You know, like, stuff like that. It's more of a popular convention for princess and prince stories now. Like, I've also read, like, webtoons where, like, if there are princess characters, they'll hold a court. Like, it's not really, like, I haven't seen it in, like, the old fairy tales, but, like, it sort of exists now as, like, a fantasy genre convention, if that makes sense. Oh, you hold court, and you listen to the peasants and whatever, right? And we do see an example of the king doing this. So the man complains that a neighbor's tree has fallen on his fence and broke the fence, and half of the tree is still there. So the king says to cut the tree in half, you know, the one that still is on the half of, like, that man's property and stuff. So basically they're like, hey, the tree's on your property, like, half of that tree belongs to you, so you can cut up the tree and build a fence and all that stuff. And then they can sell the remaining wood, so I guess the other half of the tree that's on the other man's side, and then split the profits, and then with the profits, you guys should go buy a new tree. So that's basically it. And so that's, like, you know, it shows sort of his wisdom, the wiseness and the fairness of the king, right? And so you have, hey, you know, that tree belongs to you, you can do whatever you want with it, but you know what you're gonna do? You're gonna use that wood from that tree to build a new fence, and then it's like, okay, and then you're gonna, you know, take the profits, and the guys are like, oh, the profits from the wood, that sounds great, but then the king is like, but you're gonna buy a new tree, though, for your neighbor, aren't you? And the guy's just like, oh, I guess. You're very wise, my king. Like, it's very much like that, where the solutions are fair, and I would say ideal solutions, right? But still, like, a little bit of work in those solutions, you know? Like, they didn't just make the neighbor, like, pay for it. They came up with sort of, I call it natural consequences. It's like, I read this thing once, and it's sort of more of a parenting thing, but it's like, if your child, like, makes a hole in the wall, you don't take away their cell phone. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's not a natural consequence. The natural consequence is them having to patch up the hole. And maybe you take their phone away. I don't know. I don't have any kids, but I'm just saying that, like, natural consequences are, it's like, sort of, you know, if you break something, you fix it. That's the consequence of your action, is fixing it. It's not a totally, like, unrelated punishment. And so instead of, like, I don't know, throwing this man in jail because the tree fell on his land or whatever, they come up with a natural consequence. The tree has fallen, so you take the wood from the tree, you build a new fence. Like, it makes sense to me. Then a woman comes in. This is the widow, and she says that the Grimm destroyed her village and murdered her family. And so the king steps down from his throne and clasps her hands, which, you know, shows he's a very kind king, all that stuff. He asks her what her question is, and she says, like, what do I do now? Like, I literally do not know. And then he says that she must keep on living. And then he says that she can stay in the castle and take the time she needs to grieve, and when she is ready, she can ask her question again. And so now we not only see that the king is wise and fair, but he's also generous and kind. He's letting this random lady stay in his castle. The story mentions that the widow didn't do anything for a while but eat, sleep, and cry, which is like, yes, mourning is valid, that's fine, but then she takes an interest in the king and, like, his advice thingy that he does every day. And so she says that he always saw the truth of a situation and listened to not only the people's words, but also their hearts. And this sort of reminds me of the lessons that Ozpin learned in the Hermit story. And so this is, again, why I sort of think that this is one of Ozpin's lives, because we sort of see, you know, the meditation that the Winter Maiden taught him, I guess, seems to have helped him, like, you know, get the truth of things without getting angry and see things with a clear head. And so it's like a lot of, like, the story of season stuff seems to apply here in terms of how the king is. It seems to be because, like, oh, he learned this meditation from Winter. That's how he's able to sort of, you know, think and, like, see the truth through things, right? And the story says that sometimes they brought the king gifts, and so I like this section because it says that the king was humble, but he's also polite, so he accepts the gifts, right, if they're really insistent, but then just donates them afterwards. And I don't know, I just thought that was cute. Like, maybe cute's not the right word, but I was like, oh, like, that's pretty smart. And so, you know, they give gifts to the king so they can feel like they've paid the king back, but then the king sort of gives it to the people that need it. So it's like the circle of life. And we also see sort of the contrast between, I guess, the king in this story and then the king that is in Salem's story, like Salem's father, the Lord, and all that stuff, hoarding his money and wealth, whereas this king is, like, entirely generous. So that's a nice little, yeah. But one day, a man with a wild eye arrives and pulls out a silver crown. The king is like, thanks, but, you know, I have a crown, bro. I don't need that. But then he says, like, you don't have a crown like this, bro. And then the man, like, whispers into his ear and tells him what the crown actually does. And so here's where things get, like, spicy. And the king asks him, how did you come to have this? Or how come you two have had this? Or something like that. And so here's the thing. So this is gonna get a little complicated, but bear with me, guys, okay? This king life must have happened after the life of Ozpin in the pinstripe suit, okay? Because we know that the pinstripe man somehow got the relic of knowledge in his possession and basically asked, like, where are the other relics and what are the powers of those other relics? It does not make sense for this king life to have happened before the pinstripe life, because the king had the crown, right? He had the crown, and even if he lost the crown, like, say, you know, this king life happened in between the one that builds the cane with the silver-eyed children and the pinstripe life, it doesn't make any sense for pinstripe life to be like, hello, like, what did the relics all do? Because he would have known what the crown did already if he truly had the crown. He would have just asked, what did the relics of creation and destruction do? And so here's what I'm thinking, right? He asked about the 3 remaining relics, which means that if this was one of Ozpin's lives, it happened after the Inquisitor. It happened after he had asked where all the relics were, right? So basically, Pinstripe Suit dies, and then he goes into the body of this king, if that makes sense. And so here's the thing, okay? I think that this also lines up with the King of Vale, because a lot of people think that the King of Vale happens after the Pinstripe life for the exact same reason, because the King of Vale gathers all the relics together, and for the King of Vale to know where all the relics were, they needed to basically, like, get the question from Jin. Like, the Inquisitor asked, you know, where are all the relics? Then the King of Vale went out and found them. Right? And so here's what I'm sort of thinking, like, to sort of fill that plot hole, because you may think, okay, but if he knew where all the relics were, why doesn't he go out and find it? You know what I mean? Like, why is he just sitting in his castle giving advice every day? And to that, I feel like you know, I don't know. Like, I feel like the thing about that is that being a king, you can't just go outside and start looking for the relics. You know what I mean? Like, he would have to be biding his time until it was appropriate, right? And then by chance or by fate, one of the relics was actually brought to him. That's what I would say, right? So again, just to reiterate, right? Like, Pinstripe dies, Ozpin went into the King of Vale, and again, as the king, you can't just be going around and looking for the relics. He has to bide his time until it would become appropriate for the king to venture out and find these things, you know, even if he does know where they are. If he knows where they are, like, obviously there's sort of that fear that Salem may find them, but Salem doesn't have Jinn, and so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, well, you know, the likelihood of Salem finding all the relics is, like, pretty slim and all that stuff. And then by chance or by fate, the relic was brought to him. And at the end of the story, the widow recommends that the crown stay locked down there, right? And it's possible, like, what if the relic is still locked down there to this day? You know, Ozpin did say it was more challenging to find than the others, so what if the crown is not necessarily, like, in the same sort of vault area that you would think of? What if it's in the exact same sort of prison cell that it was in, like, of this old castle? And so a lot of people think, like, for example, the crown is actually under the ruins, right? We see these ruins in, like, the Emerald Forest. It is the Emerald Forest, right? We see the ruins in, like, the Emerald Forest area when they do initiation. Like, what if that's where the old castle was? And it's, like, under there somewhere. Like, that's sort of the thought process. That's the vibe, right? The other thing about this is that the king doesn't seem surprised at all, right? Which, again, implies to me that he already knows, the, like, what the relics and the powers were. So, again, we have Pinstripe and then we have King. And, again, like, if they're, like, what are the chances Ozpin was two different kings? Like, explain that to me. That Ozpin was two entirely different kings. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure this is the King of Vale, right? And he doesn't seem surprised. He's like, how have you come to have this? Not like, whoa, dude, what the fuck, right? If somebody found a magical relic, you see me, who would be a little surprised. He's like, how did you get this? He doesn't ask, you know, like, what is this? Or like, what? Like, whoa, like, he doesn't have any, like, surprised reaction. He's just like, how the fuck did you get this? He doesn't, like, seem to question, like, what it, you know what I'm saying? And so I feel like that he asked, you know, he didn't take it immediately at first because he has never seen it before, and he didn't immediately understand what it was. But once the guy told him, he was like, oh my god, that's a relic. How did you have this? That's how it reads to me. So the king takes it, puts it on his head, he closes his eyes, and then he becomes as pale as the moon. So, like, things aren't going well. And he says, what is this? And then tells the guards to, like, seize that man, right? And I don't think this is, like, a what is this, as in, like, what is this thing? I think it's like, he didn't expect that the relic would fuck him up like this. Like, he didn't think that the relic would be like this, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, it's just total shock in how the relic actually operates, even though he would have known his, like, the powers of the relic from the Pinstripe life. And so here's what I'm thinking. I think that this is why the king is so fucking shook right now. I think that this is the King of Vale, and that he is seeing the future war. That is the crossroads that he has to go down, because the king is so shook. Like, what would shake him like that? I think the prospect of war with the other kingdoms definitely would, and that's why Ozpin is like, what is this? Like, right? It's not a reaction of, like, literally, what is this? It's like, war, what the hell? So the next day, the king is super unsure of himself. A man says that his daughter wants to marry her childhood best friend, a son of bakers, and the man hopes that she would marry higher. And then the man says, basically, you know, like, should I let my daughter marry this guy, or should I wait? And so the king says, like, listen, okay, are the parents, you know, good bakers? If they're good bakers, enjoy the free bread and let your daughter be happy. That's basically, like, what is said, right? But then the king is like, oh, wait a minute, like, what if that's wrong? What if that's not the right choice, sis? And so then he's like, okay, I was wrong. A family requires more than bread. Like, you know, wait for a better match. And everyone was like, like, you know what I mean? Like, everyone's like, how could the king, like, do this? You know, because the widow and the servant, like, the widow is literally, like, she gasps and puts her hand over her mouth for something, you know? Like, she's just so shocked that he's given such bad advice, and they have to, like, follow the advice, right? And so the widow and the servants agree it's bad advice, and he's never changed his mind before, but the servants are like, oh, well, he's the king, right? Like, what do you mean it's bad advice? Like, you know, like, they don't want to lose their job. And so even though the widow asks, and they're like, at first they're like, yeah, it is bad advice, then they're like, oh shit, well, he's the king, you know, I don't want to lose my job here. And when Arnold and I were reading this story, I was like, Ozpin just ruined a girl's whole life, bro. bro. Like, I hope that girl just ran away with the baker or something. Because, like, I was just like, oh my god, like, Ozpin, like, second-guessing himself literally, like, ruined this girl's life. Like, now she's gonna be in an arranged marriage, all that stuff. And so I was just like, okay. The king continues to second-guess himself, and the king forgoes court altogether eventually. So he just gives up. And then the king's court announces he is seeking the wisest philosophers in the land to consult with them. The only rule is that they breathed a word about his dilemma, they would be executed, which seems extreme. But I think that what's happening here is that this is Ozpin taking over some of the king personality. Like with Oscar, for example, we know there's an Oscar personality and there's an Ozpin personality. And I think the king, if he's this generous and like, wise and all that stuff, like part of that could be Ozpin, but that could be the king's general demeanor, is that he's very kind and very generous. He's not executey. You know what I mean? But you know what would make him executey? Ozpin being like, well, fuck, this is a relic, so we have to have a safety plan in place so Salem does not find out that we have this relic or we are fucked. So the widow is basically like, hey, you asked for the wisest philosophers, I'm here to try and, talk to you, basically. And so she convinces the king to tell her what's troubling him. He did ask for assistance after all, so like here she is. And it's important to note that the king wasn't wearing this crown when he was doing sort of the audiences with his subjects, if that makes sense, but rather wearing the crown in his like off hours, made him paranoid about like his choices in the court and all that stuff. He saw the branching paths of the, whatever vision the relic showed him, which again, I'm pretty sure is the war. Now he just doesn't know if he's smart enough to figure it out. How is he smart enough to figure out everything? That's basically it, is that he wasn't wearing the crown during his audience because the crown only gives one vision per person. You can't just ask it a question and it shows you crossroads and all that stuff. The crown made him doubt himself, but like the crown didn't say anything about the baker choice, for example. And so the king said, this crown has showed me a vision of crossroads in my future. I will have an important decision to make one day, and from what I can tell, it's an impossible choice. I can't see my way to a favorable outcome, and this has never happened to me before. And so the widow, she's like, okay, well, not all outcomes are favorable, but also, the crown has burdened you with a problem that you are not yet able to handle, and perhaps you will never be able to handle. In the meantime, it has paralyzed you with indecision. Even if you come up with an answer, you will have more time to wonder if it's the correct one, if such a thing exists. If you can't make simple decisions now, whether a girl should marry a baker or if two people claiming ownership of the same pig should divide it in two, then how will you respond when the moment of decision finally comes? If it ever comes. The widow picked up the crown. This is no gift, this is a curse. Her argument's a couple things. Like, firstly, he sees a branching path, but he's not yet prepared to answer that problem. The answer may come later in his life as he gains more experience, right? And not only that, but making decisions now will help him make the decision later. You know what I mean? If he's too afraid to sort of like rule over his subjects and get that experience, to get the experience of helping them with their problems, like he'll just be stagnated in the exact same mindset that he was before. Like we have to keep living in order to expand our minds, and the king won't be doing that if he just stays down here and think about the question, if that makes sense. We are constantly growing as people, we're constantly learning, and he cannot grow if he's literally like paralyzed with indecision in the way that the widow describes. He needs to just wait and decide when the time comes, when he has all the experience leading up to then, instead of trying to, decide now. And so the widow basically, gives the same advice that he did to her, just keep on living. And I really like that. Like, that made me like tear up a little bit to see sort of, his words come full circle, if that makes sense. And that also happens in The Infinite Man, which is interesting. Like, Ozpin seems to have a habit of getting his words thrown back at him, and so just like how he told the widow to keep on living, the widow then tells him to keep on living, and I just think that that's really nice. And so she puts the crown on, because she's like, it can't be that bad, and so her vision is implied to be the king asking her to marry him, which, obviously would be a very big decision in her life, and she says yes, but let's wait and discover that question together, because he doesn't even know he wants to marry her yet, right? And so anyway, she basically is like, trust yourself to make the right decision when the moment comes and all that stuff, or make the wrong decision and be comforted in the knowledge that he tried his best. And I really like that as well. And then he's like, yeah, I do think I remember you. And the widow is just like, you know, all of that sort of stuff. And like, I just think that that's really cute. And so this is the best line in the entire book right here. And it's at the very end. It goes back and it says, once upon a time, there was a very wise king and an even wiser queen. And I'm just like, yes, like, oh my God, it's just such a good line. Like the way that this story ended with that line, I was like, like, oh my God, I just really, really like that. And Ozpin's Notes does my fairy tale analysis for me, because I would usually talk about magical objects featured in things like, you know, Jack and the Beanstalk, there's a magical harp, and like, you know, whatever, cursed magical objects too, like maybe I would have thrown in some Beauty and the Beast in there, but Ozpin already explains, like, and talks about stories about cursed and magical objects and stuff, so I guess I don't need to do it. And so Ozpin goes on to say, too much knowledge can make you powerless, and maybe this explains why we don't see Ozpin, you know, regularly using the crown. Like, you'd think it would be helpful to fight against Salem, but really it does a little bit more harm than good. But I do have, like, a contradictory thing to that, if that makes sense. Like, basically what I was thinking is that, like, someone in my Discord server mentioned that there's a theory that the Cane is able to store things in, like, a pocket dimension, because his weapon can store time or something. Kind of like Fiona's semblance, right? And so I wonder if Ozpin keeps the crown, like, locked up in there, or something like that, and he takes it out so his new body or whatever, like his new host, can get like a new helpful vision, because like I'm sure that the crown is not still under the school, or at least like I can't see Ozpin never using it again. I guess that's what I should say, is that like on one hand, right, like I sort of already said this, I was like, well, you think it would be helpful to fight against Salem, why doesn't he use it? Because it caused more harm than good. But it's like, did Ozpin not sort of get the self-esteem, you know, and the confidence in himself to be able to use it without being paralyzed by it? Like, I'm sure that Ozpin has lived and grown to be wiser and stuff like that, and he's not like literally leaving it down there for eternity because it made him doubt himself once in one lifetime. Like, I'm sure he's built more self-esteem by now. So I do, like, even though I'm like, oh, well, is it still locked down there because, you know, he realized that the crown does more harm than good, at the same time, like, you think that he would also learn how to live with the crown and use the crown, right? And so I like that idea better, is that after this, he didn't just leave the crown down there literally since the king life. He has been using the crown, and all that sort of stuff. And I like the idea that it could be inside of his relic, just for storage. And then you'd wonder, I guess you would wonder, like, why wouldn't Ozpin do that with all the relics? But that's because it's dangerous. If he was ever captured by Salem, Salem would get another relic, like, even if she doesn't know it and all that stuff, right? And so I could see the argument for that, but the crown seems really important because each individual person seems to have a vision, and I doubt that the king's vision was an Ozpin vision. I'm pretty sure it was a king vision, and like I already said, I think that this vision is actually the Great War. Whether or not to, you know, join Atlas and Mistral into, like, basically pillaging Vacuo, right? Or to sort of join up with Vacuo and fight against Atlas and Mistral. And, like, that is a big choice. And so I could see that, again, this is the King of Vale, and this was the choice that shocked him so much because he didn't see a favorable outcome. On one hand, you do something that is morally wrong and unfair, which would be, like, bullying Vacuo, right? And, like, there would be peace, but there would be, like, morally, like, reprehensible things done to Vacuo, and Vale shouldn't participate in that. But on the other hand, if you fought against Mistral and Atlas, there would be war, right? And so I think that that was the impossible choice that he was being forced to make and all that stuff. Maybe we'll get to see Oscar wear this crown sometime. Maybe it is in his relic. He'll pop it out, plop it on Oscar. We'll see what happens, right? And that could also, like, bring up the stakes a little bit more, because it's not just the relic of knowledge, and it's also not just the relic of creation that Salem's after. Like, imagine if Ozpin has the relic of choice with him the entire time. Like, that would be a little spicy, because Oscar is getting kidnapped, right? And so, like, that's another opportunity for Salem to gain another relic and then just go and fuck up Vacuo, right? So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you comment down below with your thoughts, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.